I've been able to keep busy, which I think is the blessing of it all. I'm starting to get a little restless. I think for one thing, for me, like the lack of travel, I should say, is jarring. I don't think I've been home for so long, and um, so but I mean, I've been able to keep busy and keep creative, which is great. It's funny, I've written a lot of songs, and the one thing that the pandemic's taken away from me, it's sort of like, when people get COVID, they get taken, the sense of smell and taste goes away. I haven't gotten COVID, but I've lost my sort of ability to look at something and tell whether it's good or not. So I have all these songs, and like I'm gonna at some point have to look at them and be like, no, that one's not any good. But like, sort of with the lack of my day to day, I've lost that sort of sense of like, this one's worth pursuing further or whatnot. So right now I've just got a huge stack of stuff.
I mean, are you somebody who generally needs to bounce an idea off of someone? Do you need external validation most of the time?
Sometimes, but I think sometimes I just get to the point where I'm like, I like this, and I think this is good. And I do sort of have this process of punching the clock and putting stuff down on paper, and then going back and looking at it and saying like, okay, I've got all this stuff. These are the 40% of things that I think are better than the others, and I'm going to keep working on these. That second part is where the problem comes in the past year. But I've talked to other people who aren't doing anything or are finding it hard to do anything. So I think at some point this will come back, and I'll be able to. And also, I mean, you can always, as you say, you can always turn it over to someone else and say like, what's good, what sucks.
I just keep thinking about all the art that's going to come out in a year or two. It's all going to be about COVID. Like once people have actually processed this. As I mentioned before, I've talked to you a few times over the years, and one of the things that I think maybe the first time we spoke that really stuck with me is you discussing the needing to have some distance between you and the subject matter. Obviously, that's a big part of the Hold Steady songs, right? You're drawing from all this Minneapolis stuff. But do you find that the current situation is seeping into your work?
Not so much, to be honest, probably because I always have that distance of looking a little bit back. I felt the same way as you. I've sort of like, the first time I see on TV two people, kiss through masks, I'm going to throw a brick at the TV. The one thing is, I mean, certainly like with this new record, it's weird in that like, we wrote it all in 2019. And I thought that was dark times, right? Like I thought like it was so heavy, and we made this heavy record. And then a lot of it which concerned mental health and things like that. So then 2020 comes, and it kind of like just blows up. But I also feel like everyone's going to be saying that about their own pieces of art, like, well, 2020 just magnified it, but I am also saying it because I think that's, 2020 we kind of led up to it. Obviously the pandemic made everything blow up, it made everything bigger in some ways. It put a microscope on things like income inequality and certainly mental health issues. But, we were already close there. I mean, that's sort of what I'm saying about 2019 felt pretty heavy at the time.
You're not singing about Trump, obviously, and you're not singing about COVID because this was recorded before that. Can you point to sort of tangible examples of how these kind of like abstract shit that we're all dealing with has impacted at least like the themes or the mood?
Yeah, I sort of like joke that if there was like when you see a movie poster, there's always like a tagline under the title, and I sort of felt like it was like power, wealth, and mental health. And a lot of people on the record are I found when some of it you go in writing about, and then some of it kind of reveals itself to you. A lot of people in the record, I found it strangely discussed a lot of people's occupations, how they made money. I think it talked about technology and how, we use it and how we communicate in some ways. And it also talks a lot about mental health, which is, something that as I get older, I think becomes more and more of my work, less about, partying or those kind of things, substances, highs and lows around that, and straight mental health, because that's sort of where it leads, right? And I think like that's one of the things that very scared of because of to be honest, because of people around me having kind of slipped away in some way, one way or the other. And that's a terrifying thing to watch. So I think that's really captured my interest about people who are, struggling in that way. But, like the title track, not the title track, Open Door Policy, the title comes from a song called The Prior Procedure, which is sort of about people who take shelter in a situation that is, created by a really rich guy, maybe a billionaire. And he has a place where he takes people in, but it's sort of on his terms. And I think that's kind of like a very modern thing, like we give, the political sense would be, we give a lot of tax breaks to people so they can, but then they give back through a charity, which is totally on their terms, So I think that's kind of one of the examples of a modern thing that's common in the record. But I'm never going to write a song that's, fuck Trump. That, I always say, like, I'd rather make an Ang Lee movie than an Oliver Stone movie. And, so I think these are stories, a lot of these stories about people who are affected by policies and who are struggling and who are, at some point, I think I kind of changed. And it might've been when I started making the most recent solo records in 2015, started becoming interested a lot more in people, not necessarily people who made bad decisions, but people who tried to make the right decisions and still, came up short.
People making bad decisions has been a theme in your music for a very long time.
Yeah.
That's nothing new. The connection between mental health and partying is an interesting one. Obviously, it's not that these people who are drinking and doing drugs and partying in these songs aren't struggling with those issues. It's just that they've chosen this specific set of tools as a way to deal with them. And then when you get older, if you're lucky and you survive and you move away from that a little bit, then you actually have to start paying direct attention to those ideas.
And also, the people I'm interested in writing about have grown up a little bit. They are Boys and Girls in America had a lot of 19-year-olds on it, and this record doesn't. There was something someone on social media posted. It was like, if you gave yourself advice, what advice would you give to someone in their 20s? And this person said, get your chemicals in order, because once you turn 30, it's going to get different. And I think that's really true. I think that, you can, there's an age or something or a part where it becomes more of a mental health thing than it becomes, a party thing. And I think that's where I'm at with the writing on it anyways.
It sounds like the way you're describing how it manifests itself on this record, that it's more observational, that these are based on you having seen these things in other people.
Yeah, always. And I think everyone in our, modern society has seen these, these kind of things happen. It's certainly reflected that way in the news, et cetera. But yeah, I think it's there's a certain amount of desperation that comes through that isn't necessarily desperation in the sense of an action movie. It's more of a quiet desperation that's kind of become more interesting to me, I guess.
COVID is kind of the ultimate example of turning off external stimuli and having to deal with the thoughts in your head.
Yeah. And, I did, not to be super morbid, but at the end of 2020, I made a list of everyone I knew who died. And that's not mostly from COVID,
You sat down and went just over the course of your life, or in 2020?
In 2020. And there were 20 names. And, many of those were people's parents who died from other things, but there was regardless, it was a lot of death, too much death. And that's a heavy thing. And that's the world we're living in right now.
Is it something that you've struggled with directly?
Well, yeah, in the sense, the COVID thing was interesting for me. My partner's a nurse. So in April, May, I moved out of the house because she started treating COVID patients. And I moved into a family member's house, and because our apartment just didn't have enough separation. So like that, that felt crisis-y. That felt very like we were in heavy times, right? And then I got a bit of a lift when the cases got under control here, and she went back to her old job, still a nurse, but a different different unit, and emotionally definitely went up there. But at the end of 2020, I sort of was taking a tally. And I realized how this had happened. And it felt, there's some part of this that's just I'm almost 50 years old. You get older, your friends' parents get older, that stuff happens. But it also just felt like it was a particularly, heavy year and maybe important to remind, this idea of self-care or whatever, to remind yourself that because I can sit here at my computer and at my desk and get really angry that I didn't, write enough or do enough work in a day. But you kind of, I think, have to forgive yourself sometimes for that.
Because I was dealing with some also health issues at the time, and I'm in Queens. I was here when shit was really bad, and late March, early April, and I was dealing with certainly a lot of depression through it. I mean, I think everybody was to some degree. And are you familiar with the concept of anhedonia?
No, what's that?
It's sort of a symptom of depression where basically you're unable to derive pleasure from making or listening or consuming art.
Oh, wow.
Just as a side note, you'd probably appreciate this. It was the working title of Annie Hall. It was actually originally called Anhedonia. It's a very different movie. Cool. I've definitely seen my own relationship to music specifically change over the course of this. I wasn't able to listen to it at all. And I started listening to some sort of ambient music and kind of worked my way back up to it. And I'm curious, how your own relationship to both listening to and making music has changed over the past year.
Listening to music, I was with you. Maybe I had the same, some of the same symptoms because, mental health was definitely, exercise is a big part of sort of how I deal with mental health. And I sort of feel like a fog, comes over my head and I can kind of run it off a little bit, or even walk it off. During COVID with masks and everything, there was at least at the start some reluctance to be outside and pursue that, and certainly haven't gone to the gym or anything. So there's that. Music listening in 2020 was really different for me. I actually also listened to some ambient music. I didn't love I didn't really have the occasion to listen to music. I don't, I listen to a lot of music walking around and in my daily travels on headphones, and that wasn't happening. And I started listening to the radio more just because it was passive. I didn't have to think, I didn't have to say oh, what do I want to listen to? You just turn it on. And so that was actually kind of good. That's kept me company a little bit. I'm not really big on lists, top 10s, that kind of thing anyways. I don't do those, but I wouldn't have been able to put up a top 5 last year, and, things like I listened to a lot, more like Brian Eno, music for airports, talk. I listen to that a lot, things that just kind of envelop you and don't require that much focus.
I was listening to an interview that you did a couple of years ago, and you had mentioned to somebody that part of your process in touring is just sort of taking some time to yourself and walking off, which I can totally appreciate. I mean, I actually love traveling by myself. It's great to just explore a new place. Do you get the sense that you're kind of prone to introversion though?
Yeah. I mean, I always have been. That's always been a thing. I like going to things alone. I like traveling alone. I like going to movies alone, going to shows alone. I really do that. I found it, and New York's a great place for this. I like being alone with other people around, with strangers around, I can really concentrate on my book if I'm reading in a crowded cafe. You get me in a quiet library in a university, I can't think, I need a little bit of white noise or whatever. So I really enjoy that. I mean, one of my favorite things of the past few years is I did a European tour solo with Brian Fallon. And then we had some Hold Steady shows in London. And I could have either come home for 6 days or killed 6 days in Europe. So I went to Lisbon by myself. And it was I love, I love my friends. I love my girlfriend. But, being alone in a foreign city for the best part of a week was one of the greatest things ever. I really do that. I get a lot of good thoughts. And I think moving past things, even signs or neighborhoods you weren't familiar with, getting a little bit lost, I think is really good for creative process, at least mine.
Do you find that as you progress it, you're going more out of your way to actively cultivate that you're actually out there sort of seeking inspiration from these things?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Jeff Tweedy wrote not the book about the songs, but I think it was like more his biography, kind of autobiography, memoir. But it kind of talked a lot about creativity too. And there was parts of that I thought were really spot on, really matched what I think. And I think that he was talking about kind of making an appointment for yourself to take things in. And I think that that's really important, and that may be like watching a film or reading a book, but also just walking around. I think you get numb to your own neighborhood a little bit, or things you're used to seeing. So, and New York's great for that, because you could say like, I'm going to Brighton Beach today and walk around, and that's like that's something that's going to be maybe not your normal thing, and you might see something out there that stimulates. But I also saw something recently that Patti Smith said about like, if she's not writing, like she doesn't necessarily beat herself up about not writing, but she might instead of writing, read a book of someone who she admires. So then she's kind of thinking about writing, and that's helping her in the long run too. And I think that's very astute as well.
I write for a living, but I don't really like reading people writing specifically. Well, certainly not like how to write books. I don't find those particularly useful, but I do find it really useful to hear people discuss the creative process, to sort of like discuss it in a bit more of an indirect way than that.
I agree. Like the how to, and, analyzing everything especially with songwriting, it's just like really tough for me. But having someone say, like I love, Nick Cave's a favorite artist, but he talks about creativity very well. He had this thing about, he takes lines and sees how they vibrate against each other. I'm like, that right there, that's what I'm talking about. Like I can get that. But the second they start talking about meter and rhymes and hard rhymes and slant rhymes, I'm like, fuck this. I can't do this.
One of the things I also do, I heard you quote Joan Didion about the writing process, about not really knowing where you're going, right? Of just sort of like sitting down and just starting the process of writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think then that's when you make an album, that's very much a part of it, because, if you write, say 20 songs and you throw out 10, so you've got 10 now, it almost every time it's like, wow, I was writing a lot about that, and it might be something, a theme, it might be like death, or it might be love or whatever, but it also might just be like, weird that parking lots keep showing up in these songs, and you're like, why, some specific detail that you keep going back on, that may be because it rhymes with something, but it also is like, what am I thinking about parking lots, and why does this, why does this keep showing up?
It's funny that you mentioned that specifically, because I'm either going to be the first person to mention this to you or the 10,000th person to mention this to you. And it's just because it's one of those phrases that really hits your ear, is frontage road.
Yeah, I mean that's a Midwestern thing, frontage roads. But my friend and I always, my very good friend Eddie, we talk a lot about. We had this kind of idea about frontage road rock, like rock that kind of happens.
So frontage road being sort of like parallel to kind of the main highway.
Yeah, it would be like a service road or a frontage road. I mean, and certainly at least where I grew up in the Midwest, but I think a lot of places, sort of have a type of business. You might have car lots, but you might have a tavern, but it wouldn't be like a real hip place, probably.
In the way that like certain neighborhoods pop up around airports, for example.
Yeah, exactly. And in Minneapolis, there was going to the airport, there's the 494 strip, which now I don't know, but like back in like the 70s, it actually was kind of some swinging kind of 70s places on that. So maybe that's where it got in my head. Like the Minnesota Vikings would party along the 494 strip there. But it's frontage roads, it's Shakey's Pizza, and it's car dealerships, and it's the Ground Round or whatever, But yeah, I do think it's somewhere where you it's every day, I guess, is what I think.
Part of the reason why it hits the ear is because, one, it's not a phrase that you hear a lot in music generally, and two, was it Separation Sunday? One of your albums like has a couple of mentions of it. So it was interesting to hear you come back to it. And I'm wondering if that is something that you're conscious of when you're writing?
Sometimes, I mean, frontage road is something that just I think is part of my Midwestern and suburban vocabulary, and I picture things, the kind of stories I tell often, and the people I talk about, frontage roads are in their lives. But there is definitely like sometimes where you're like, there's kind of callbacks that are very intentional, and they're also just language. I mean, I think that one thing, the first Psychedelic Furs record I really love, and he says stupid, the word stupid, like he must say it like 17 times on that record. So you're kind of get into this thing where you're kind of saying it, and it becomes a little bit of this lexicon or language that you're speaking with the audience that people appreciate, I guess.
In a sense, you will always be Midwestern, but has living in New York for, I mean, it's probably been close to like 20 years at this point for you, I would guess.
Yeah.
Has that had a profound impact on your writing?
I can't tell you exactly how. I've lived in New York for 20 years now. What I would say is that all the travel I've done since the whole study started, because of all the touring, has made me made me less. I'm really interested in geography and spots, but I guess I think that I understand the world to maybe be a bigger place, and I think that it's harder and harder, especially within the US, to find the unique spots in a city, right? I mean, I think we've kind of got the same stuff everywhere, right? And when people say, how did you like Kansas City? And it's like, it's what I'm used to.
Here's the subtle way that the pizza is different.
Yeah. The potato chips and the beer are different, a lot of things. Those are kind of the things, potato chips and beer, that really regionally differ. And then
maybe you go to Cincinnati and get chili on your pasta.
Yeah, but there's Petco and Home Depot everywhere, and oftentimes together.
Was Lifter Puller still a going concern when you came out to New York?
No, Lifter Puller had broken up. And I guess I was sort of looking, Minneapolis had started to feel a little bit small, and I thought that New York might have some opportunity, although I wasn't sure what it was. And, it was a bigger city. I was interested in that. I did think that New York had a creative class of people that would be, when I decided what I was going to do, I could do it there, meaning
with your life.
Yeah. And there just sort of was a seriousness about being an artist or being creative where, if you made an appointment, and, this is not a knock on Minneapolis, and this may have been the people I was hanging out with, but like, things wouldn't necessarily start on time, or, you'd go, you'd say like, when do you want to meet? Well, let's figure it out tomorrow. And I do think when I found what I was correct is that, the people I met in New York, when you want to do something, they show up on time and they're prepared, and there is a sense purpose. One of the things I think that is non-geographical that I was dealing with was that I never went to art school or anything. I don't know that I identified as an artist until later in my life. I had a job and I wanted to be in a band. I was in a band, but like, I didn't fully understand it as a life until, maybe in my later 20s. And so I think some of that was me getting used to it. But I thought New York was a place where there was more opportunity, and turned out there was.
What does it mean to identify as an artist?
Well, I think that you're kind of trying to create the world that you're living in, right? You're trying to create something that reflects how you want to see things or how you see things. I mean, one of the things my girlfriend has said to me recently is that, like, if you're not an artist, you're subject to be way more of a consumer, because, instead of trying to create the world you're living in, you're going to try to acquire the world you're living in. So I think that in this day and age, being an artist is coming down on the other side of that in some way, to sort of create rather than to consume, or at least have some balance in there.
Creatively, you identify yourself with, or you identify with, I don't know, like anti-heroes, or at least, people who are like often down on their luck. Mm-hmm. So what does it mean that that's the world that you want to build?
Well, I think I want to find peace and comfort for people. And, that was always an interest to me, even as a young Catholic, Jesus with the prostitutes and the tax collectors and all that. I think that there was in different parts of my life, it took on different things. I mean, in fact, I think I always think of this one when I was real young. I think it was Ray Charles was on Sesame Street. Ray Charles was on something when I was young. And I'd been watching Happy Days and I knew Fonzie was cool, right? Like he's cool. He wears this leather jacket. And I remember saying, Mom, is that guy cool? And she said, Ray Charles, yeah, he's cool, And I said, Mom, do we know anyone cool? And she said, no. And I remember being like, what the hell? How this is a ripoff. We don't know anyone cool. So I think in some ways there was a search through that world, going to shows, going to parties in that different parts of town, etc. Maybe a search when I was younger for authenticity in some way, a search for a non-suburban feeling, somewhat pushing the edges of safety or boundaries. But now I think it's more of compassion and empathy from where I'm at now.
There's always been an earnest quality to a lot of what you do, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why you get compared to like Springsteen a lot. And I think part of the reason why it's unique is because in some ways it seems to sort of run counter to some of maybe kind of like the punk at the time, right? I mean, in that, like, obviously there are earnest ideals in and around punk rock, but people are afraid of sort of wearing their heart on their sleeve too much or writing cliches. Are these two ideas that were ever difficult for you to reconcile?
I think that one thing I found, especially when we started the Hold Steady and started in my writing, is that honesty can be, it's very disarming to people, like they're real honest, but it's also, maybe a salve against anxiety. I mean, I wonder if I always wonder, like whatever we're keeping up, right? And there's some sort of I remember, even being like so upfront about really kind of digging into the Minneapolis thing, even though when we started the Hold Steady, I've been living in New York for 4 years or a few years, was partially because I saw so many people around me, people I knew who'd moved from the Midwest and kind of reinvented themselves, and I thought that there was power. There is a power in saying like, hey, I'm from Minneapolis. I'm from the Midwest. My hairline is pretty receding. I weigh this much. This is how much money I have in my bank account right now. But there's nothing that they can take away from you then if you're just that honest, And I found a power in that. And I found that people reacted to that and maybe relaxed and maybe felt better about themselves through that process. And I think that was kind of reflected in the songs and the art.
I wonder if part of the power in those first two records, the first two Hold Steady records, was that I get the sense that the group of you guys didn't go into it with any sort of expectations of like becoming huge rock stars, right? You were in your 30s at the time. Not that like there aren't rock stars in their 30s, but like there wasn't an expectation that you were going to be the Strokes.
It was absolutely that. I mean, the expectations from the Hold Steady, especially on the first record, were almost laughable. I mean, they read like a joke. Like we were literally, when we started the band, in a discussion on whether we were even going to play shows, because we decided that, from Lifter Puller, the one thing I didn't like was moving gear. So like, if we don't move our gear, then it'd be fun. And we weren't, recording, putting out records were really not what we set out to do. And in that sense, it was really fun. And I think that what happened, especially with Separation Sunday, as that got more press, is a lot of our audience came out and, a lot of people kind of were rooting for us in that, they were roughly our age. And, we'd get all these notes on our, website through email, people saying like, I haven't been to a show in 4 years, but me and the wife, we're going to get a babysitter that night. We're going to come out and thank you for doing this. And, that was, so you felt like, there was a sense that people felt like they belonged or something and were a part of something. And that's something we, in a weird way, once we started getting going and decided we were going to play shows, we set out to do. We wanted to create a band that people could kind of feel a part of. And in some ways, that's the thing that blows me away about where we ended up, is that we actually were able to do that, because there is a great community around the band still.
When there is success around that, like second record, I guess would probably be the time you guys were on the cover of The Voice, you're getting noticed. How much does that change the math for the dynamic of the bands and the kind of the pressure to be successful?
I mean, that comes in little bits of waves. I mean, I think there's a few things. One is when everyone, there's always this thing of people that say, when did you get to quit your job? And it's like, you don't really get to quit your job. You become unemployable.
You're touring and
yeah. Like you just, there's this leap of faith. It's like, there's not a big amount in your bank account. It's just like, if I keep playing shows, there's going to be a little bit of money in my pocket. I just can't stop playing shows. But, you get a booking agent and that becomes more possible. I think, that was a thing. I think that one thing that changed, one thing to be honest is that changed a little bit was dealing with sort of the way things were covered. And, you're a band, being in a band is one thing. It's all for one for all, but suddenly a lot of people want to talk to the lead singer. And that's, something that every band has to negotiate, and some do better than others. And it definitely around then felt like, something, I wouldn't say a challenge would be probably the best. It wasn't a struggle, but it was something new. And then, there's just the kind of things of being gone all the time, and whether, giving up some aspects of your normal life. I got divorced around Separation Sunday. And, it wasn't helped by the fact that I was leaving for 9 months at a time.
The vast majority of people in bands that I talk to tell me that to some degree it does need to be run kind of like a dictatorship, and that like somebody needs to be a very clear leader. I mean, is obviously that is with your solo career, but is that also the case at all with the Hold Steady?
I don't think it's a dictatorship, but I think I think what the people are telling you that do hit on a really important thing, which is, if you were an MBA student and you were studying like different types of organizations, a rock band is like the worst kind, because even a fraternity, the seniors tell the freshmen to clean up after the big beer party. A rock band, everyone's equal, but not everyone, but then there's like, and so there's this de facto thing that starts to happen. And I think that's a challenge that every band needs to do. It's about communication, really. I think I definitely tend to probably put forth the most like, hey, I think we should do this, but it's important that everyone kind of buys in on their own way. And a dictatorship is, probably a good way to create resentment and whatnot. So I think, it's like, if you knew someone like was most susceptible band member to not wanting to do something, you might check with them first, right? Rather than put the pressure on them to say no in front of everyone. But these are all things you learn. We're 15, 16, 17 years into the Hold Steady. So, I think we're at a different place for that. But I do think that one of the things I believe is that, that there does have to be like the ideas and everything should have to come from the band. And then like, your management or whoever you're working with has to help you further those ideas, but the ideas still have to come with the band. I think a lot of that is something I've noticed people lose sight of.
Is it just assumed that after every album and every tour that you're going to get back together and do this all over again?
Well, we don't tour like we used to. I mean, we do these residencies, which actually has just made the band feel really alive, because I think we aren't doing it in that way where we go on, put out a record and go on tour and, totally exhaust ourselves and then recover and try to figure out what to do next. So there's this kind of constant whatever, we're at this point, starting in 2016 when Franz came back, we're kind of always working on songs, always kind of scheduling the next weekend of shows, these residencies, and, always kind of compiling music that we will at some point release. However, we decide to either, one song at a time or as an album or whatever. But I think we've kind of blessedly gotten out of that hamster wheel of, and I think that this is the thing. I mean, so much has changed on the business end of how things are with, Spotify and streaming and whatnot, that it's really silly to not change kind of how you do things. And unfortunately, what you do find is that rock and roll, I think especially, there's a nostalgia to it. So some people are really like, you need to tour. I don't like how you're doing things. I can't listen to it if it's not an album. I have to put on a CD in my man cave and listen to it this one way. And, you got to sort of push forward. And that's one thing I think believe we've done really well, is sort of just adjust what we have to make most sense for us and keep it creative. And I think it's paid a lot of dividends. I think it's been really fun for the past few years. And I think that's when we're making our best music, when it's fun.
Part of the reason why I ask is because I assume that every time there's a Craig Finn solo record, everyone's like, there's going to be another Hold Steady record, right? You guys are still the first time you release a solo record, where people like the band is still together, right?
Yeah, I mean, the solo records in part exist because I want to work constantly, and not, as with everyone else, some in different cities, some in different parts of their lives. There's kids, there's whatnot. I don't have any kids. I just want to play music, and I want to write music and work on creative stuff. So this allows me to do it. And it also allows me to scratch different, itches. I mean, like, the Hold Steady's not going to do God in Chicago. And so it allows me to kind of work in these different ways.
That song specifically, why wouldn't the Hold Steady do that song?
Well, I think it's pretty much a spoken piece. I think, I just don't think it would be interesting to those guys to do something that was just, so much, I don't know, just not real rocking, with the Hold Steady, I really just write the words. So, I'm writing words to things that Tad or Steve or Franz bring in, and that's kind of how music comes out. So, I understand why fans would think that, because I'm a music fan and I would think the same thing, but I also at some point think it's kind of unreasonable.